Alrighty, good evening, all. This is Jared from Resilient Living. This is the Resilient Living podcast. I'm joined by my friend Ryan and our guest Tim.
Everyone.
Alrighty, so before we get going, I have a product that I want to highlight this week: the Shema. I did some research on this beforehand. Do you know that the Shema originally developed sometime in the 3100 BC in Mesopotamia? Something that's been around for 5,000 years. I think it's pretty good. It's definitely worth having. If you don't know what a Shema is, basically think scarf, but gigantic. Like this thing's 44 inches by 44 inches. It's huge. Can be used to protect your neck from sun, can be used to create a impromptu sling. If you broke your arm, you can pre-filter your water with it. Just a good thing to have. So if you come by the shop and pick and tell me that you saw the live cast, I'll give you a discount on it. So that's that.
Awesome. Well, I want to introduce our guest today. This is Tim Reilly from Regenerative Orchards. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I'm pretty excited about having Tim on. I want to pick his brain because he's got a really cool specialty in dealing with kind of regenerative and permaculture orchards. But Tim, why don't you take a minute and tell everybody, who Tim Reilly is and how you got into this, and maybe a little bit about like where your interest came from and then how you got into doing what you're doing.
Awesome, man. Yeah. So I'm Tim with Regenerative Orchards. I was a medical sales rep for 13 years, surgical sales, instrumentation, headlights, containers. We had a bit where we came through and we would CAD out a room. So that way, hey, we're doing orthopedics, we're doing, pediatrics, and we need to store certain things and shelves and organization. I did a bit of everything, and we was pretty successful at that for a long time. Then, life changes and you have kids. And luckily for me, I had the kids excuse combined with the COVID excuse. And so I went back to work for maybe 3 or 4 months. And then COVID happened, which was one of those things where you get an email from the state of Tennessee and it says, hey, we're not buying anything anymore unless it's PPE and masks. And then we started calling around, hey, who do we know in Turkey and Korea who makes N95 masks? And so we sold those for a little bit and then got back into the operating room and selling, equipment again. And all along that while, we had our kids and I planted a couple of trees, and, you have that downtime where we planted a tomato and it died. And then we planted a peach tree and it died. And I wasn't really caring about it. I was more doing it just because I had idle time. That being said, COVID happened. And we looked around, and there was a rap song that I sent to people. I come at this from preparedness and conspiracy, and I would always send it to them. And it was from Michael Render, and it was Reagan. And in there is a line right in the beginning, and he's talking about rappers and what they're talking to the kids. But he says, "We all brag on having bread, but none of us are bakers. We all talk having green, but none of us own acres. And if none of us own acres and none of us grow wheat, then who will feed our people when our people need to eat?" And that line stuck with me for a while now. And I look back on it and I go, all of my friends, we all make decent money. We all have lives and kids and houses, and we're doing the things, but none of us have a garden. None of us grow anything. And so I looked at that, and right along that time, John Willis started inviting people out to his property, which then leads you to Billy Bond and Joel Salatin and Ryan and Kerry Brown. And you just get into this network of people who are actually, first of all, doers, but growers as well. And so I started latching onto that, and I had a property on the border of my fence, and on the back side of it was this no man's land that was butted up to a condominium in between a creek. And it was just this little parcel of a triangle that will never be able to be used or sold because it couldn't get a septic or a perk tank. And the city came through and put drainage in it. And on the back side of our fence, after, as you know, in permaculture, if you disturb the soil, God's going to put something there. And all that was left after they put in this big drain that literally never held any water or had any water go through it, they brambles and vines and, multiflora rose came and it started pulling our fence down. And so I came through, cleared that out, fixed our fence. And then I looked back there. I was like, man, I got to clean this up. So as I was cleaning it up, all of this started coercing together. And I was like, well, let's put some blueberries back here. Let's put some fruit trees back here. And so I started to slowly, I hadn't had a name for it, but it was like my food forest lab. I planted at different depths. I planted on top of the ground, below the ground, too low because the clay at level sucked it underground and then it rotted and girdled the tree. And so I did this all on the guise of about 5 or 6 years. And through that time, my skills progressed. And, it was the beginning of last year, January, and a guy came to Self-Reliance Festival, Tag. I met him and I talked to him for a little bit. I said, man, how are you building community the way you're building it? He says, I'm from the business world. I have a calendar. It's on my computer. And I literally plot out on my calendar, this is community building time. So he literally takes part of his day each week, 2 or 3 times a week. And then he says, hey, this is what I'm going to go build community with it. So it's whether it's going to go fix his neighbor's fence or have a community day at their property. He always does that. And so I made it an effort in the beginning of last year to go, what can I personally do to help people out that I want to build community with? So there's the Gorham Homestead, there's John Willis and a few others of friends and family and new friends. And I looked at them and I said, what can I do? Well, it's winter and it's pruning season. And so I went through and I started pruning people's trees, laying mulch around them. And as I was doing it, I was thinking, man, I'd do this for free. I bet people would probably pay me to do it as well. And so that's kind of how Regenerative Orchards got started. I had a few other names of businesses in that 5 or 6 year period that I was using because, people don't want to invite you to their house and have them plant a tree in your yard if you don't have a business name to go along with it. And so I was Perennial Edible Landscapes. I was the Food Forest Company for a little while. And I kind of set on Regenerative Orchards because I fall into the guise of your name should be what you do. And so, the Homestead Consultant. I'm pretty sure I know what Ryan's doing with that. And so Regenerative Orchards is kind of fit because, we might get into it, but having a food forest is an awesome landscape and additive to your property, but it's not always right for the right people, as well as it's not as productive as a regular traditional orchard can be. And so my teachings and learnings from whether it was Permapastures Farm, whether it was Mark Shepard or Jeff Lawton, I took his PDC, all conglomeration of all those guys is kind of where I'm at. And building a permaculture food forest, although a great tool, isn't necessarily what I'm loving to do or have the ability to sell to everyone.
That's really cool. And I totally agree. I actually think a properly structured permaculture orchard will produce more and be easier to manage. So I think Jared's biting at the bit to tell you what he came from.
So I was 15 years as a biomedical engineer. So I was the guy in the hospital that
those were my guys. Those were my guys. So maybe they don't want me to say their name, but those halogen xenon bulbs and headlights. And so we sold, the Strikers, the Medtronics. I had all the repair business for all those xenon bulbs. And then also our own headlight company that we had as well. So yeah, that's funny. That's I went across a lot of this country, so we might have ran into each other at a trade show.
If you were ever up and down the West Coast, I was there.
The West Coast, yeah. Well, I'm at Anaheim for AORN.
Okay. Yep.
So yeah, that's funny.
Nice.
Small world.
It is.
It's crazy how we've all come out of something that was a lot more technical.
Yeah.
Well, in one sense, more technical, but we're now dealing with, instead of complex systems, we're dealing with complicated systems.
Yeah.
And it still takes a mindset of thinking through things systematically.
For sure. Yeah. I try to, whenever I get an engineer, I get somebody who has been in the business world and they've looked at, hey, they have a warehouse. Well, there's a guy in there who does the supply chain and he's probably a 6 Sigma black belt. where that's that processes of a hospital or a warehouse. And it's like, hey, why is the packing station here and not here? Why is this? Well, in permaculture, we call that an energy audit. How many steps from this step to this step? And oh, hey, this shelf that has this thing that we pack every day is 4 rows to the left. Nope, got me. It's 4 rows to the left. Why don't we move that closer to the pack station so that way they don't have to move so many steps? And
Yep.
now we've got less wear down. Our employees are less fatigued, and that goes right into your orchard or your homestead and your property. Hey, why is there all the tools in the garage when I'm in the garden and that's 100 yards away? Why don't we put a little shed near the garden spot and buy double the tools so that way when we're working around the house, we have the tools for the house and we have the tools over here for the shed for the garden. Cost you a little bit extra money, but over your time and your back and your legs and your life, you've just added to yourself. And so I think you're dead on right on there on the complexities of job and technicality, whether it's IT or engineering, to getting into your permaculture lifestyle.
Yeah, I think one of the permaculturists who I've been by far most impressed by is Alan Booker.
No,
and
shoot. Yeah.
and I mean, not only is he humble and he'll just like sit there and talk with somebody he doesn't even know, which was how I ended up meeting him. I didn't even know who he was. We're just sitting there and I'm like, this guy is fascinating.
Yeah.
But he's coming at it from an engineering mindset and able to then also layer on top of that the idea of complexity. So it's neat to see when people can break out of the that really strict engineering mindset and start to do systems thinking. And actually, like you said, you put one thing closer to the other and it reduces your effort dramatically.
Right.
So, well, you had mentioned really liking, you kind of pushing more towards orchards, as if I'm understanding you right, as opposed to what people would think of necessarily as food forests, which sound really cool, but have some drawbacks. What can you give a little bit of definition of what the difference is to you and why you like one over the other?
So I think my biggest problem or issue that I have with the food forest is it's the first thing everyone learns about when they learn permaculture. It's either that or swales, one or the other.
Or the what do they call it? The herb spiral.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah, herb
I hate
spiral.
that one too.
It's so much so I've never made an herb spiral to the point where I'm like, I need to just make one just so I can say how much I hate it after I've done it. But it's
right.
It's one of those things. What I lean to: don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. If that's what you love and that's what your thing is, and that's what brought you from buying your oregano and your chives from the grocery store, and you grew your own instead of in a pot or along your back door or in a along a trellis or whatever it is. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. That's what you love. Awesome. I'm excited for you. But to your point of the food forest, I don't think people understand the maintenance aspect of it, one, and then two, I compare it to like caviar or whiskey, wine. Well, maybe wine's not a bad one, but when you talk about caviar, fish eggs, but you can it's an acquired taste that you could possibly eat it a few times, have someone talk you through the different flavors and what the oceans are. The same thing with whiskey. That's fuel that we've put in a barrel that was burnt, and so that dark color is just biochar that you're drinking, and this tastes good. The tannins and the yellows and the oaks. Yeah, you're smelling, you're tasting burnt wood. That being said, there are people who acquire that taste. And so when you tell someone about a food forest or they see it in a picture, they see the perfect definition of it, not this acquired taste of what native plants look like. They're weeds until they're not, And so when you're looking at, hey, the rosemary goes here, well, we're going to space it this far because it's going to grow up alongside this other plant. Well, it doesn't look like traditional landscaping to them. And so unless you've got someone who is acquired this taste for it, 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to plant it themselves, and they're not going to want to pay someone to do it for them. And so
right.
there's that aspect of it. And then the secondary, what I started this with, was the maintenance of it. It is a maintenance heavy, maintenance dominant addition to your property. That being said, over time, it will have less maintenance, but up front and in those first formative years, when you're planting your pioneer species to get the soil acclimated, and you're chopping and you're dropping and you're reducing the succession planting of your pioneer trees versus your understory, it's this whole ecosystem that people like the word, and they love when people are passionate about it, which I was and still am. So I can talk to anybody about it and get them super excited about it. But in the end of the day, is once it's on their property, I have the questions of, oh my gosh, Tim, all these trees are dead. And they send me a picture and I go, no, those are apples. They're deciduous. They lose the leaves. And so you're dealing with this duality of what is beneficial and what is the knowledge aspect of having to go back and train someone the difference between deciduous plants and non-deciduous, perennials versus annuals, which is why when I first started with perennial edible landscapes, people didn't know what that meant. And I was like, okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board and rechange this name to something that people can understand.
Yeah. It's incredible for what we all do, how important the educational side is.
Right.
You know, if I go into, I don't know, something that I'm less familiar, like, let's say administrative work, I'm going to need, probably 100 different acronyms explained to me before I can even talk with the people. Right. Or if I go into the medical region, I need to start to learn some form of Latin to actually speak the right language or to understand what's being talked about. So yeah, it's fascinating to me how much education actually plays a part in what we do. I don't know if you do this, but I oftentimes, if I set up a system, I'll do a whole video on it and then post it as an unlisted on my YouTube and just send the link to the client.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea and you can do it both ways. One that's, more buttoned up where it's like promotional for your business, but then also secondarily, hey, here's this boring step-by-step non-TikTok brain 4-second clip that I can get to you. It's like, hey, here's step one. Do this, then do this, and then do that. That's a great opportunity to upload that as unlisted and just keep it as a file to forward to people or add the link in. A lot of times I put together a pamphlet or a document and then I put in QR codes or things of that nature. But I love that. I'm definitely going to steal that from you.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I do, my actual YouTube channel was not intended to be a like forward facing YouTube channel. I mean, it was kind of, but really the whole point was I wanted to do videos. So when I did a consult, when I explained something like I don't know, like a rotating chicken system in a garden, I could go, here's a video explaining it. So you have a visual. Right. And it was really more just a tool for helping my clients understand what we were talking about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to be using that probably tomorrow. I've got a couple that I talk about. I talked to yesterday, and I was like, I need to make a video on that. And they're like, I'm like, oh yeah, that's going to be a whole day thing of me deleting videos and structuring and editing. We talked about that. It's that's the next thing of the education point of even bringing in the people who maybe are on the edge of, hey, this food in the grocery store is poison, and I see all these videos of the Bill Gates appeal, and wow, this apple is at least a year old that I'm eating out of the grocery. It's not fresh, even though it says fresh. So yeah, that's definitely something to do.
Well, you've been killing it with your content, honestly. I mean, you've put out some really high quality shorts.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I've been trying. It's a lot of me looking at what other people are doing that aren't in the industry and just trying to apply that to it, as well as to your point. That's why, like, my Apple history videos, it's like, man, this is fascinating to me, but I need to have something I can send customers to go, hey, I know you said this one book. Oh, it's right here, actually. Old Southern Apples by Lee Calhoun. Has this information in it that says Kennard's Choice was one of the best tasting apples in 1896, but they don't care. And so when I can literally part of that was to drum up the sales of, hey, I can push this link to someone and go, hey, these are the why I chose these heritage breed apples. And so I think that's something that is more education for potential clients, but has turned into, now I'm probably going to have to start a nursery. The amount of people who I'm like, hey, here's the guys that I buy from. Just go frequent them. And to the point where one guy, I had to be rude with him because he wanted to come meet me, I guess. I don't know. He's like, I'm not that far from you. I go, well, the guy I bought these from is literally like 10 minutes from your house. And he was like, no, it's not a big deal. I come to Tennessee all the time. I was like, I don't have any apples. Now, if you want me to put the apples on your property, I can sell you the apples because I have an amalgamation of what I bought, but these are all being held for installations. So
yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of what is it? Did you guys ever watch the Civil War series from, I think he was on PBS?
Yeah, Ken Burns.
Yep. Ken Burns, there we go.
Yep.
Your videos, so your voice is not quite a dead ringer, but really similar to the guy who does the narrations. And your videos, because you do the way you have moving pictures on the screen, it's like watching a Ken Burns documentary, but short and entertaining and like super informative. So man, keep it up. I'm sure those take you forever to make, but
yeah, they take a little while. And to be honest, I had seen like 2 or 3 of Ken Burns documentaries years and years ago, and someone commented on there, was like, oh, the Ken Burns of the orchards. And I'm like, Ken Burns, I don't even know. I'm like, whatever. Thumbs up. Thanks for watching. And then Radio Made Easy commented, and he's like, Ken Burns of apples. And I was like, all right, let me look into this. I'm like, oh yeah, I see this now. And he was actually just on Joe Rogan. And so I listened to that Rogan, and I was like, all right, I see where people are getting the correlation, especially like you said, the moving pictures. That's all they have to go off of is, Civil War reenactment pictures.
Right.
So them panning through, and I'm like, I was just doing it because of watching other creators, and when they have a still, it's just lifeless if you just keep an image there. So you kind of have to do some sort of movement. Like I did a permaculture guild in correlation to a mutual assistance group, and I had a perfect little bit, and I paused it, and I've edited it together, and it's 2 minutes long, but it's just me kneeling on the ground talking, and I'm like, I can do this better. And now I'll have to reshoot it and have different angles and cuts, and because it's, you're trying to retain people. And if I'm already bored halfway through, I know people who don't even care about what I'm talking about aren't going to watch.
Right. Yeah, it's a huge process to just put out any content, really.
Especially nowadays. I look back at the videos I used to watch that were like 30 minutes long, and I was like, man, how did I do it? My brain has been fried by these videos.
Right. Could you give us like a quick explanation of like the NAP system, or, other complementary plantings that people might be interested in using in their orchards?
Yeah. So the NAP system is something that I employ in all of my designs. It's kind of that controlled chaos of a food forest, but able to be in a linear fashion where we're actually creating more edge effect. Whereas, an organic food forest island that you might put in your backyard would give you a lot of edge or a keyline design. Whereas what we're doing is actually creating rows where you can maintain it with equipment or without, but also creating diversity. So that way, if you have the NAP is Stefan Subkowiak creation of his own, which he adapted from the permaculture handbook from Bill Mollison, and it's a nitrogen apple pear, or a nitrogen fixer, productive, nitrogen fixer, productive. And so it can be a plum, a persimmon, whatever you want it to be. And he's actually even switched that. He says in some of his podcasts or his later masterclass that I've taken, he's like, I wish I would have come up with something else, but I call it a trio now, because it doesn't have to be a tree. It could be a Siberian peace shrub. It could be anything that's nitrogen fixing, or at least disruptive between the two to create diversity, because you don't want, 2 Macintosh apples right next to each other, because if the fly comes in and starts munching on one, or the caterpillar, it's going to go to the next one because the branches are probably semi close, and it's going to know that's where the food is. Whereas if we have what I like, an Eastern Redbud, a Kennard's Choice apple, and then a Chickasaw plum, well, those are 3 different trees, and then on the next row over, you're going to stagger that. And so right across, you'll have from the red bud, you'll have another fruiting tree, and then another red bud or another nitrogen fixer like mimosa is great for our area. And so that way, when you have them along each other's line, you don't have anything touching that is the same style of fruit. You can have close, but if you're gonna have it where you're like, listen, I live in zone 3 up in Ogama, Wisconsin, and pears and apples are really all I can grow. Well, at least switch that cultivar up. So if you're going moon glow on the pear, switch it to Ayers or Kiefer next. So that way, at the very least, you're gonna not only change that pattern recognition up, so maybe this one's more resistant to this certain type, as well as you don't want to have the exact same cultivar throughout the entire orchard, because if you get an early frost, well, you've just wiped out all your peaches or all your apples or whatever it is, because it's the exact same blossoming type. And so having a nitrogen apple pear or a trio of trees allows you to have diversity, but in a maintainable way.
Okay. Awesome. You mentioned, what was it? The mimosa tree in what you were saying as a nitrogen fixer, which I've been fascinated by, and everybody I ask about it tells me, don't do it. And
right.
Tell me more about that, because I think it's actually a great way of getting a free tree that actually has a ton of medicinal benefits in your orchard. So tell me what you think of mimosas.
So when I'm looking, so within the permaculture orchard or regenerative orchard, I'm looking for perennials clearly, but within that, it's how do I pick those? Because we can go on University of Tennessee's ag program and go, all right, well, this is the type that is native to Tennessee and all of that. What I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to think of a great term for it, but ditch natives is kind of where I've gotten. If you're driving down the road, the interstate, the highway, your back roads, and you look off in the ditch, what's growing out of the ditch? And that could be, you're going to see red buds in the spring. You're going to see mimosa growing, flowering shortly thereafter. You're going to see your cottonwoods. Now, not a nitrogen fixer, but a beautiful tree. But then you go lower into that substrata, you're looking at your bushes. Well, we've got blueberries abound. You've got your Rudbeckia or your black-eyed Susan. You've got purple coneflower. And so when I'm planting those natives in the orchard and I'm picking them, I'm looking at the ditches, because that's where I'm going to pick what God's already saying, hey, this is what's fixing the soil. Where I put it, you might as well put it where you want it. And then, as Stefan says, let's grow trees like weeds. If it grows like a weed, might as well put it in the orchard, because then I don't have to work for it. And people keep saying that they don't want mimosa because it puts out shoots as well as drops the seeds, which then puts out more. Well, we're going to be maintaining this. It's the problem is the solution. If you're not someone who is the doctor that we've dealt with and the surgeons in the hospitals, and they've just, hey, I want to put an orchard on my property, and they're actually, hey, I've got this job and I'm starting a homestead and I need a little bit of side hustle money. Well, you're maintaining and mending the soil in this orchard row, and now you've got some mimosas coming up. Dig them up, put them in a pot, and now you've got trees to sell, and you've got your own nursery as well. So I think people get bent around things. It's that not let perfect be the enemy of good enough. I would rather have mimosa trees coming up that I could smother with some organic weed mat, also known as cardboard, versus having to replace tractor tires because I put black locust or honey locust in there. It's I would love a bunch of black locust, shift mast straight poles, and then I could reuse those. I don't want to deal with the thorns.
Right. Yeah. Well, and when I think of mimosas and nitrogen fixers in general, you're dealing with something that can be coppiced or pollarded. And if you're pollarding or coppicing your mimosa tree and then using it as mulch, or using it as, they can even be not in high amounts, but feed for animals, things like that. Like what you do when you coppice it or pollard it, when you're cutting off some portion of the top, is that the roots have to shrink. And so those roots that were holding and binding that nitrogen now go away, and that nitrogen is stuck in the soil for something else to use. So if you're doing, I mean, it probably takes 2 minutes per tree in your orchard to take a sawzall with a pruning blade to your mimosa tree once a year.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's one of those things where I contemplate, even there's the talk of like, what is a nitrogen fixer? You know, it are gummy berry nitrogen fixers. Go on Permies.com and type in Eastern Redbud nitrogen fixer. Boy,
yeah, there's
that's
fights about that.
oh yeah, super big fights about it. But it goes back to, yes, I would love to have nitrogen, atmospheric nitrogen, being put into the soil so that way we can feed the trees. That'd be great. But I really think that we're wrapping ourselves around the head on this, because you know, it's like putting wood mulch down. I'm growing tomatoes. I don't want it to rob nitrogen. Well, are you fertigating? Are you fertilizing at all? Because I'm using compost extract, which high nitrogen. So is the perfect Elaine Ingham soil food web 100%, and my wood chips is now down to 85? Well, I can fertilize with some liquid nitrogen via compost extract, or just putting rabbit manure around the plant, and then I'm back up to 100. So having that mimosa where it would be great for it to be fixing the nitrogen in the soil. What if it doesn't? What if when you dig that plant up and you look at the roots, there's no nitrogen nodules on the roots? That I found that on a number of trees where you pull it up and you're planting in between it, or you're moving a tree or removing a tree that's dead, and you look down and you're like, I don't see any nitrogen nodules. Well, maybe the nitrogen's already fixed. It's a nitrogen fixer. It's not a nitrogen pump. So
Right.
we have a thing of, yes, the roots do retract slightly, but I don't think that it's like that 100%. I think from what I'm grasping, and it's ever changing, is that the tree puts out exudates into the soil and tells the soil microbes, hey, I just got broken off in a windstorm, or a deer came down and broke me. And, they don't know the difference between, I can't remember the name of that Sawzall blade, but I ordered some on Amazon after you put that video up.
Oh yeah, the Ugly by Skill.
Yes.
Skill
They're awesome.
I've been using the Corona, or no, not Corona, Devil something or other. It works pretty good, but I've ordered those. I know I'm going to use them, so I was like, let me give them a shot. But the tree doesn't know the difference, and so the original theory was, if you break the branch, then the roots are going to die off. But I think what happens is, in the way I describe trees to people, especially when we're pruning, is imagine a fire hydrant. And so right now your fire hydrant has got 20 garden hoses coming out the top. Well, it's probably got 10 to 20 down below too. And so because we crimped one off or cut it and pruned it, did something come down there and cut and prune that one down below? I don't think it did. I think it's more the exudates and the sugars in the soil get changed differently, which then allow the nitrogen fixation to happen when you coppice or pollard those trees. That's just a hypothesis that I'm working on, so don't take it to the bank. Either way,
but I like it. Yeah.
Tree. Either way, plant the tree. But yeah, I agree with you. I think mimosa is one of those ones where we're not south enough for the real good tropical plants, but we're north enough where we get those great deciduous plants like apples and pears. And those mimosa leaves and the flowers, they're almost a tropical vibe. And so adding them into a design is something I always try to do. But at the very least, I think simplifying it down to just an Eastern Redbud, where you can go with Merlot Redbud. In the standard one, you get the purple leaves and you get the green leaves. And then the springtime, you have the pink and the red blossoms, which are edible. But I mainly do it for visual yield. And that's what a lot of my designs and a lot of my consultations are. It's, hey, I want an orchard. What kind of orchard do you want? Because my orchard is different than your orchard. And it goes back to that beluga caviar. What are you looking for? And I think a lot of people, especially, your 40s, 50s, 60-year-old people, they're looking at orchards from when they were children. And so an orchard today, majority of orchards being planted are planting on dwarf rootstocks. Mm-hmm. And so that's bud 9. It's only going to get maybe 10 feet tall if you're lucky. They don't want it to be that tall. And so when we're talking about what we're going to be planting, what do you visually want to look at? Do you want to look at rows? Do you want to look at a food forest? And so that's another discussion for another time. But a lot of people don't have that ability to even visually look at a field or look at a house, which is why when you're buying a home, they always want you to stage it, because
Right.
people can't see a dining room table in the dining room for some reason. I don't know why, but they want you to leave that in the house when you're moving.
Right. Yeah. Interestingly, so when I was a kid, and I didn't quite grasp all this until more recently, but my grandparents had this house in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and there was a Wolf River apple that was probably 40 to 50 feet tall. And the
Whoa.
thing put out so much high quality fruit that it actually became a nuisance.
Right.
There's just too much fruit for them to even know what to start to do with. And it was amazing. It had so little issue. It was just incredible. But, you don't see that anymore. It's always dwarf or semi dwarf rootstock. So nothing gets large like that.
Right. Yeah, and I've got an installation that the owner, that's what he wanted. What I try to pare it down to is, what is this for? Is this for you to get a crop, or is this you to leave a legacy? And if you're trying to leave a legacy on your land, well, then we need to be leaning towards the very least semi-dwarf and maybe standard. Like in that Wisconsin, I there was a podcast I listened to a couple 6 months ago, I should say, and it was between Stefan and one of his students or pupils, I would say, and he had an issue where he accidentally planted something too low, and it sucked down, and then the scion actually put out roots. And during a huge hard freeze, out of, I don't know, a bunch of trees, only that one survived. And so he was like, well, why was that? And he realized that it became a standard rootstock. So a lot of people, I'll get called for consultation. They're like, I can't keep this tree up. It's always blowing over. I'm like, well, is that a dwarf rootstock? It's meant to be strung up on a wire or a spaliate alongside your house. It's not meant to withstand the winds that we get. And so
Right.
I think I'm leaning towards, and I don't think I'll ever plant unless it's against someone's house and we're already doing an orchard. And time will tell. If someone calls me up and says, hey, this is what I want a multi-million-dollar orchard and I want it all on Bud 9 dwarf rootstock. Well, we'll make some concessions, but I'm leaning towards the long-term legacy of the land and being a steward of the land versus being a miner of the land and just mining the nutrition out of the soil. I want to put back to it. So that way, if I plant and whenever we leave a site, I always try to leave it as if something happens to me tonight, something happens to the owner and they're no longer alive. These trees, I left them as best I could in the stages of the installation that we can. So that way they're going to be perfect. And if that means, hey, we're going to go to dinner and we're going to come back and we're going to remulch these because we didn't get a time to, we're going to do that. And so I've done that 5 or 6 times now, to the point where I'm like, I need to film this. And so I filmed it the other day of spreading mulch in the dark, just because it's like, hey, if you're doing it, people need to see it, because, it's just like the hospital business. I don't know how much free stuff I gave the biomed guys. Until you put it on a quote and you charge it for $0, or you write it on there and you can scan it to them when you do a business review and say, hey, remember all that $10,000-$20,000 of free product I gave you? Now's the time we're renewing a contract, and you got to remember that.
Right.
Yep. So, yeah, I've thought a lot about using like Antonovka apples and as potential rootstock, because it's full-sized rootstock. And you get a consistent product. Obviously you can buy full-size rootstock as well, but the idea of being able to plant from seed and get a consistent output with apple trees is a cool concept to me. So anything you've ever thought about, or have you ever worked with just straight seeds instead of always getting something that's pre-readied or grafted on?
Yeah, I think, that's how apples and trees used to be planted. If you, for my videos I started looking, 1800s apple orchard. There wasn't an apple orchard. It was called a farm. It was an apple farm, a tree farm. And so what they do, they bought land and they took the pips out of the apples and they planted them and they waited for them to come up and then they would overgraft to either what was successful and what was good, or they would graft onto a known scion. And so either that's how the thousands of different apples came to be, is they planted thousands of trees and they waited for them to either fruit or not, and they would overgraft to them. So I think you're right on the money there. I think more people should put into seedlings as far as rootstocks, but there's also one called, I think it's M7, maybe M75. There's one it's not full standard, but it's just under full standard, and you can get that and graft them yourself, or you can order them that way.
Cool. I've been flapping my jaw a bunch. Jared, do you have any questions for Tim?
I'm just learning. This is good for me because I'm on the equipment side of stuff. So learning all the homestead stuff, the agriculture stuff is great.
Cool.
Well, I mean, and I've only been able to catch a few of y'all's lives, but I correct me if I'm wrong. You're from the preparedness background, correct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. So after I got out of the medical industry after COVID and I sold my biomedical firm, yeah. So I opened up a store that we provide the equipment side. So yeah. So freeze dried foods, clothing, a lot of books. I love books because I love knowledge like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I sell a lot of that kind of stuff, knives, and we'll be getting into guns and other fun stuff.
Awesome. Well, I mean, from a preparedness mindset, this is the quintessential storage item. I can't remember who it was, but I'm gonna say John Willis. He says, meat on the hoof, meat on the hawk. Why have to put it in a storage container, which you should do, because it's going to take a little bit, and when there's a stressful time, you're not going to tell your wife or kids that, hey, hold on, let me go butcher this rabbit or chicken. And so by having the ability to store food on the tree, and not only store food on the tree, but the tree itself then becomes more trees, right? So it fruits, you have your seeds, you can then cold stratify them and turn them into rootstocks, but you already know that the tree itself, whether it's 5 or 6 apples or whatever, so you can then learn to graft, which
Sure.
you can buy 5 or 6 books, and there's some great grafting tools, whether it's that, or you can just literally, I've done it with just my Milwaukee knife.
There you go.
So it's super easy to do, and I think from a preparedness mindset, it's a pivotal prep that most people miss. It used to say water and then medical, but long-term food storage that's on the tree is another additive, and something that I always prep, because it's something, apples are something that I've recently gotten into, but my real fruit that I like, which is from the logo, is figs. So in our cold climate, we almost lose our fig trees every year back down to the ground. And so before our harsh winters, I go through and I cut and prune our trees down to 3 or 4 nodes, and I've got a fridge right here next to me that's full of cuttings, because
Nice.
then you keep them cold, or you can leave them outside, and now you've got trees you can sell, but more or less you have trees to replant. Every year that tree is going to put fruit on the new growth. And so by having the ability to have calories every year from a fig, and you're on the West Coast, I mean, shoot, it's almost a perfect climate, because the fig tree comes from the Mediterranean.
Oh yeah.
So I think preparedness leads to homesteading, and homesteading leads to preparedness. And so
Yes.
if you're coming at it from one angle or the other, adding fruit trees to your land, and it doesn't have to be like I prefer, I think our minimum I've decided is 6 trees, just because it doesn't economically make sense to do an installation for less. But when you're talking about this, I started in buckets. You can go on homedepot.com, Agri 5-gallon black buckets. They come in a 10-pack, drill some holes in the bottom, and you can have 10 different fig trees, berry, honeyberry, sugar, agave, all sorts of different types. And when the roots start to get a little messed up, you can prune them, or you can literally just take a cutting and start a new tree.
Yeah, figs are
Sure.
pretty interesting.
They are.
So years back, when I was doing a home inspection in Nashville, I came across this house, and it's an older brick house, and it had this giant concrete parking pad. I don't like over the top of the cars. So I don't know what that was about. If it's like a tornado proof parking area or something.
Carport of some sort.
Yeah, but it's concrete. on a house. Anyways, there's probably 20 figs planted around the house, about 2 feet off the house on the south and west side.
Yeah.
And they were legitimate trees. Like they were year over year being pruned back, to keep them from getting too big, but they were actual fig trees that were living without any protection. And so essentially just the thermal mass from the home and that concrete pad
Yeah.
were keeping these trees alive. And so I was there, I think it was February, and there's actually still a few viable, like edible figs on the trees
That's
in
awesome.
February. Yeah.
That's
So I was like, I got to try that. So if you've got a south facing retaining wall or something similar to that, where you're going to have a lot of thermal mass, or in this case, it was an old home. So there's a little bit of heat, making its way through the wall out to
yeah.
out to the brick as well. But if people have that, that's a potential way to keep. I've actually done it with a few brown turkey fig I've seen actually overwinter just fine that way.
Yeah, I mean, like last year, most of the growth from last year for my figs, I tried to keep as much as I could, because as long as you keep as much as you can, you're going to have that much new growth at that much faster of a pace versus having to come out of the ground and out of the crown.
Yep.
It didn't really pan out as far as the speed of ripeness for me. So I'm just going to go back to pruning them down to about 6 to 12 inches, piling on with the mulch, which few places I know I missed. But it's one of those things where every year, without fail, I know that figs are going to come up and they're going to put on a crop. And man, there's such a bigger. It's just like the grocery store. There's 6 apples at the grocery store. There's probably 6,000 different types of apples. So figs are the same thing, and I've that's another iteration of social media to go through. But I mean, it's such an interesting story. How many little old Italian men came over on the boat, and they literally took a cutting, this 6-inch cutting, they stuck it in their sock, and they came over and they got to Brooklyn and they stuck it in the ground. And it's like the fig tree was that important to them that on the trip, like, listen, I'm leaving home, but this dessert, this little
I'm bringing it with me.
bringing it with me. And it's one of those things where there's a lot of people who think and feel that the fig tree was the knowledge that Satan tempted Eve with, and then it's like, hey, Adam, this is the best thing I've ever eaten, you should try it. Because at the end, one of the guys I talked to this year about it, he said, have you ever tried to cover your nether region with an apple leaf? He's like, he goes, no, it wouldn't work. He said, but imagine a fig leaf, which is, I wear medium-sized mechanic gloves. I've got the Irish spud hand. I got real wide hands, but short fingers. But he's like, imagine a fig leaf, an LSU gold fig leaf. He goes, it's probably that tree. Now, in between that and the flavors that you can get out of them, there's some that taste like banana. There's some that taste like cherry, strawberries. You could literally just have a fig orchard and have every flavor of fruit in just figs.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that.
Is.
Well, I've got another question here. I wrote a few down, so we probably won't even get through all of them, but
that's fine. That's fine.
What are some of your favorite trees? Obviously, we talked about figs. There's some really cool apples. Anything else you're a big fan of?
Man, I'm a huge fan of Japanese persimmon. It goes to the low maintenance of the orchard and pest pressure. I started with heritage breed apples because of the fact that when you look at heritage breed apples, they were around before chemical agriculture. So the pests and the sprays, they survived it. Now, are there some that still get cedar rust, and there are some that still get, all the bots and the flies? Yeah, there are. But for the majority, there's quite a few that survived without any chemical intervention because there wasn't any. And so that goes to the fig. The fig, everyone says we need to have this fig wasp to pollinate it. Well, our common figs they don't need it. And that's only in the southern part of California and Mexico for our hemisphere that have that fly, that wasp. And so then it goes to the persimmon. Our native persimmons, it's a great tree. But the fruit's about the size of a $50 and the seed is about the size of a quarter. So when you go to bite into it, you're eating more seed than you are fruit, which is great for deer. You're trying to bring deer on the property, but it's also great if you're making jams because they're a massive amount of fruit on them, and you can just pulverize them down, pull out the seeds, and make jams out of them. But when you're talking about Japanese persimmons, they put out a fruit, especially the fuyu, which is because the native is an astringent and the fuyu is a non-astringent, meaning as soon as you bite into it, you don't get the pucker effect. You can eat it whether it's hard or soft like jelly. And you get into the persimmon, and the persimmons have a vast amount of flavors as well. Like I'm thinking there's a coffee cake, and you have to plant that near the chocolate persimmon to get the pollination for the perfect flavor. It's
That's cool.
It's wild. It's wild. So you can look at them. There's lots of great footage and pictures of Japan in the 1700s of how they dry them and store them. But yeah, the fuyu persimmons is one I always try to have in a design whenever I can. A lot of it goes back to that education because people look at it and it's this orange beefsteak tomato that's hanging in a tree. And like, what is that? It's like, well, if you want fruit in the early season, we need to talk our peaches, and then you talk your plums and your nectarines and your figs and your apples and your pears. All of that runs through June, July, August, September, but the fuyu and the Japanese persimmons don't come ripe until the cold actually starts to set in. And so
Wow.
you want to have fruit from, May, June, all the way to November, December, maybe even January, if you can let it hang that long before we get like the hard freezes that we got this year. Japanese persimmons are definitely one, and they're, like I said, very disease resistant to the point where I don't think they have any, knock on wood, yet in our country.
Nice.
Yeah, that's very cool. I haven't thought a ton about persimmon, at least Japanese persimmons. I didn't realize that you got them non-astringent. I thought you basically had to let them fall off the tree before they taste decent.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case with all of them except for the fuyu. And then there's, I believe, is it Nikita maybe? There's one that's the cross between them, and there's a few that are non-astringent. But yeah, it's essentially you need to wait for it to be just this literal bag of jelly. Imagine a Ziploc bag filled with raspberry jelly. And if you could poke it like that, that's when it's ripe to cut and take off, or else it'll be the last time you give a persimmon a try. I can tell you that much.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so the American ones I think are really good. I don't know of anyone doing this, but I think they'd be great as a fodder tree in a civil pasture system for like pigs and things.
For sure. Yeah.
I think you could really fatten up some pigs fast on persimmon.
Yeah, especially if it's more of the typical type of harvesting of the pig, because majority of pig harvesting was in that fall time because of the cold, and so
Sure.
that'd be a perfect time to have them feed on the fallen persimmon and then fatten up. And I always think about it was a Joe Rogan video with, I don't know, Steve Rinella or someone, and they talk about this part of Alaska or some island where the black bears are just gorging themselves on blueberries to the point where their fat was blue, and so they eat into this fat, and it's like it was sweet because of how much fruit that they were eating. And
Sure.
I can only imagine, a country ham that tastes like sweet persimmon jelly. You might be onto something, Ryan. You can trademark that.
Right?
Yeah, I don't think I can. I don't think I want. I don't want to be, Monsanto light here, trying to keep other people out of it. I'm all about ideas and giving them away.
That's right.
I am as well. When you said that, it sparked something in me. There's a guy, he's on YouTube. Check him out. Tremendous knowledge. M.I. Gardner, Luke.
Mm-hmm.
And he is right when I started to get into heritage breed apples and finding these, essentially almost extinct apples. He started putting out content of him like traveling to these remote areas and getting cuttings off these trees that are hundreds of years old. So that way he could send them to Washington and have them labeled, like, are they real? And I commented once, it's like, man, so cool to have your own cultivar. You could patent it. And then he has Scion Woods. He's going to be selling stuff. That'd be great? And he's like, no, I don't want to do all that. I'm like, Man, I guess I've got too much salesman in me that wants money, but I don't know if it's necessarily to make the money, but the heritage of you could name your own apple, and so the people who might be listening to this, drive around those old highways and look in the ditches. You're like right now you're going to want to look for squatty branches, lateral branches, short trees compared to everything else, and then keep looking and you feel like, hey, that might be an apple tree. Wait for spring and you'll see those blossoms coming out, and then you're going to have to wait a whole another year to get the cuttings, but go back in the winter and get those cuttings, because if you could graft them onto a standard rootstock and then send out some of those leaves and have them tested and it comes back as an unknown, you have your own apple tree. You get to patent that apple, and heaven forbid it's cedar rust resistant, and you could then sell it. But better yet, you could name it after your children. Jared and Ryan's Cox Pippin, or Orange Red or Golden Delicious. Like you could literally end up possibly having a fruit in a supermarket, and then you have that heritage of, hey, Dad, remember when you did this? Yeah, your grandpa did that 200 years ago, found that cutting, and he propagated it and made it what it is today. I met some people in North Carolina. They've done just that. And it's a cool thing. And this guy, he's got one for each of his children. He's looking for one more. And I'm like, man, what a cool way to pass on heritage. And, heirloom seeds came from, that was the best gift that you could give at a wedding, was heirloom seeds, because it was grown year over year. And that tomato might have started out as a, Arkansas Traveler or whatever it was, is now no longer that apple or that tomato, because it's been cross-pollinated, and that seed has been passed down from generation to generation. But you could imagine that from an apple. Cool. You could do it with figs as well, but I think that's just such a cool idea. And so, to your point of not wanting to be Monsanto of the pig industry, man, it might be a cool thing to say that, your great grandkids could talk about one day.
Yeah. Well, I think bringing an idea to market or an idea to bear, I think that's really cool. And for what I do, the point would be, here's something showing that I know what I'm doing, or that I have insight that somebody else might not. But I'm with you. And being able to trademark a name for a fruit or something, I think is really cool too. And it's only for a certain period of time, and you're essentially only trademarking a name, not really the genetics of it.
So, yeah, and it can clearly, I could go out in the side yard right now and take my Canard's Choice and cut it and graft it.
Yeah,
sell
right.
It. But it's one of those things where, if Stark Brothers, for instance, wanted to sell it, they would have to buy a license from you. Right. Or you could literally call up an attorney and go, hey, I found someone using mine, and you would have the patent, and you could take it, and yes, you can get some money out of it, but it's just like, let alone the fact of the money, just knowing that your tree is now spread all over the nation and their kids, and it's something that I understand now more, but still I would rather, it's just, hey, that's either a baking apple or it's an eating apple. But every person I meet, they want to know the name of the apple. And so for the fact that from, maybe New York to California, you could have an apple that was, the Stevia Select. I just think that's such a cool thing that could possibly happen. So if you can't tell, I'm looking for apple trees.
Well, I was going to say, there's the kind of background behind us on the screen here.
Yeah.
That's my little mini orchard in my front yard. And if you were to think of a line going back from it about half a mile, I've just learned recently the history of some of the additional history of my valley. And apparently about 250 years ago, there was an apple orchard on one of the plateaus at the top of the hill back there.
Very cool.
And so I'm going to try to get with some of the neighbors and see if they'll allow me to take a hike up there someday. And, it might be everything's completely gone and overgrown, but there might be some trees left.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the old timer guys, they knew what they were doing by attaching to seedling rootstocks. It's the University of Georgia just hopped into this with, I'm sure the people who did it haven't hopped into it, but they just started planting an orchard, and they did 200 or 300 heritage breed apples, and they did it on dwarf rootstock. And I'm like, yeah, you get fruit quicker, but man, I just think about, hey, if this project dissolves and the land gets sold, you could just leave it fallow on semi-dwarf even rootstock,
Yeah.
and those trees would survive. All of us would be dead, and those trees could possibly survive, and then the next group of people could do what I'm doing now and learning about all of this, and you could perpetuate the genetics, because the Grimes Golden comes from West Virginia in the 1800s. That's still the same apple, whether it's been grown wherever. It's the same apple from the 1800s because it was a scion wood, like you said. It's not it's a genetic match. So
yeah, it's literally, if you can imagine the branch of the tree growing and then growing out hundreds and hundreds of feet, that's what you're dealing with, is the tip of that tree,
right?
Because you're just grafting on that tip onto new rootstock, and then you're cutting more off of what that creates onto new rootstock. And so it's really pretty fascinating to think about. That is the tree. It's not a seed from the tree. It's not it's
the same
genetically that tree.
Right.
So yeah, pretty cool. Tim, what are some of your thoughts on swales and how you should or should not use them?
We talked about it a little bit in the beginning. Swales are, to me, the first thing that a lot of people learn about when they learn about permaculture, and it's one of those things where 9 times out of 10, it's probably not meant for your property. It's one of those things where everyone wants them, and they say, hey, where can I put a swale? Like, you don't need a swale here. We've got a lot of valley. We've got a lot of this. You've got way too steep. I think the permaculture designer's manual, I think it was 18% grade or greater, which when you graph that out, you've got 90, and then we're 45. Half of 45 is 22 and a half. It's not that steep.
Right.
And you start talking mudslide. And then on top of that, we're talking, how deep do we need this to go? And I think, when the rule is the slope is 1/3. So 1 foot down goes 3 foot back on a 45. That's a lot of land. And so you're talking about, goes into the maintenance of a food forest or the maintenance of a swale. You're possibly on a 45. If you need to go down deeper, now you're 2 foot down, 6 foot back. And so we're working in this area where you don't really get a lot of maintenance on flat ground or semi-flat ground, because you're changing the topography. Now, there's a lot of places where it's a godsend, right? The Arizona desert, a place like that. And even here, I mean, I'm starting to think I need to pull back a little bit on it, because, man, we had the worst drought we've had in 50 years. Started out with the wettest spring we had in 100 years, but if what, I think Jack Spirko in the Survival Podcast talks about it, Texas is shifting its weather patterns over towards Tennessee, and we're called Dixie Alley now for tornadoes. That used to be Oklahoma, and I think Oklahoma, and I think Texas, I think arid desert. And I worked in Texas for a number of years, and they have what they call the 100 days of 100, where it's 100 degrees for 100 days every day. Shoot, we get that here with no rainfall. It's not. We're going to want more swales. So I think a swale is something that we want to apply when it's necessary, but I think people overuse them and they don't really understand their usage. We're trying to refill the aquifers, but could we possibly just do that with increasing the organic matter on the soil? So I think 1% increase in organic matter is 20,000 gallons of water retention
per acre. Yeah.
Per acre. So if you're just increasing the organic matter, which we're going to do anyways in a regenerative or permaculture basis, we might not need the swale.
Yeah, and there's other ways to approach the same problem, right? So we can use, I think, contour is extremely valuable in understanding what that is.
For sure.
I personally like to build out orchards on contour, whether I'm using swales or not. And then as I'm putting mulch and things in, and I might build a small, essentially a small berm over time because of how that organic matter sits. And it becomes a filter as water moves down, it spreads things out. So, my peaks have as much water as my valleys, but to just go and dig a swale because that looks kind of cool and that's what you want to do, you can really do a lot of damage to your property by approaching it that way.
Right, right, 100%. And that it goes back to what's the visual yield? What are you looking to get out of improving your land with fruit trees? And
Mhm.
then I don't know how many people, and it's why I veered away from doing permaculture designs, is because people have still are set. They moved from California, at least in Tennessee here, and they're like, "Oh, I want to grow an avocado." Well, we can't grow an avocado here,
Right.
but those bushes in the front of your house, we could replace them with blueberries. Oh, I don't know. The HOA might not like that. First of all, strong words towards HOAs, but why not just plant the plants there that are you're going to walk by every day? I can think of
Right.
one where they had this beautiful driveway, a 2 or 3 foot retaining wall along the driveway that they walk down every day to get to their mailbox. Imagine raspberry canes or blueberry bushes or in between tomatoes, and you're walking by that every day.
Be
Instead,
awesome.
well, I can't plant fruit in the front yard. It's against the HOA. I'm like, okay, well, you and I need to go separate ways because I am not of like mind. And so I think you're right. I don't know. I digressed.
Yeah. Well, no, you didn't. It's true. It's a mindset. And sometimes the mindset is I saw this thing that I want to do and swales looked really cool. And I know you've seen some of my swale videos, and I try to
Yeah,
make it really clear that swales are not always the best option. And
right,
when you do swales, maybe consider them smaller than you would have
right.
otherwise. And I also really like to fill in the berm, not the berm,
Trench,
blank. What's that?
the
The,
trench,
yeah, the trench or trough or whatever you want to call it. I
big.
actually like to fill that in with organic matter or wood chips, things like
You're
that.
supposed to. You're supposed to, and
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people do. I think a lot of
Mm-mm.
people make it and they want to keep that like that. The way I've learned it, or at least I was taught, every bit of pruning or chop and drop can either go on there or in the berm. And you're
Mhm.
supposed to actually, when you create that trough, you're supposed to fill that with biomass. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and I think to my point of bringing it to the home the city was if you put in a swale and you sell your property, it's going to be a pain in the butt and cost a tractor or a skid steer or a bulldozer to come out to rip those trees out and grade your land back. And
Right.
so by just making an orchard where it's just organic matter that's going to be retaining this, you can pull the trees and leave them or sell the trees because they can be much to the chagrin of people. You can move trees. They
Mhm.
come in, you can pull them up, preferably do it in the winter, but I've done it in the summertime. And you could literally call up, put it on Facebook. Hey, I'm moving. I've got 30 trees planted in this orchard. They're 5 years old, and sell them. And people will show up at your house with shovels, or at least I have.
Nice. Yeah, I think I've never actually heard anybody else talk about filling the trough of a swale with biomass, but you know, y- you want to think about access when you're doing these things too.
Yeah.
What is your access from one side of the property to another? Are you impeding that? Are you creating bigger issues by making these scars on your landscape? So, yeah, I'm 100% on board with your thoughts on swales.
Talk to me about creating your orchards on contour. Does that interject with your north south facing, or is it something where in the cases where you're maybe on a loop, are you spacing the trees out more to have them have good solar aspect, or how are you go into that for me?
Yeah, so I'm not as concerned about the north south facing, like the how you're laying your trees out as far as the north-south facing exactly,
Hmm.
because I prefer to have this trees spaced a little more and then put things like trellises for blackberries and other kind of understory stuff that is going to do a bit better in a little bit of shade. Um, so I tend to space my trees just a little bit more and give bushes and shrubbery and such in between the trees on the contour line. So that's been my approach to it. It doesn't mean it's the right approach. It might be for you, it might be for somebody else, or it might not be. But I prefer to do that. And then, like I said, if I build up, mulch, or maybe I want to do a stone line down the road, or I've even on the swale video, I'm actually doing it after the trees were planted. So they're downhill slightly from my swale, and they seem to benefit quite well from the swale. And I was able to do that because I didn't have time to put the swales in before I planted them. So I just found contour, put the trees on contour, and came in behind and did that.
Yeah, makes sense. And I always love seeing the land of like a cattle field, and you can always see the path of least resistance for the cattle when they're headed back to the barn, because they walk on contour. They're not going to want to walk uphill. They're going to pick the lowest point and they're going to run it. And so by doing that, you're also helping your maintenance, because you're not
Mhm.
fighting the land that you're on. You're planting and walking in a manner that you would naturally walk if you were on this, excursion hike through a field. You're not going to be trellising up and down the side of a slope. You're going to be walking along the side of your egress pattern. So it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and to your to your earlier point of you know what? It's gone.
That's all right.
Sorry.
That happens
This
to me all
happens
the
at
time.
least once a podcast for
It
me.
happens to me all the time, and I'm like, well, what's going on in your life? It happens to all of
That's right. So Tim, where can people buy plants, or where should they buy plants? What should they be looking for?
man. I always try to steer away from your bigger places, just because it always seems mischievous and it doesn't always come out right. But man, I've put out some contents for some local places, and even then you get trees that aren't as healthy because it's not their full-time job. I think for the lay person, your larger place like Stark Brothers is a great resource. You can get on there. It has the drop downs. They've paid a lot of money for their online presence to say, hey, here's my zone, here's where I'm growing. A place that I is a wealth of resources, and I'm hoping one day to get out there and do a podcast with them just for my own personal desires, is a Century Farm Orchards. You can check them out online, centuryfarmorchards.com. It goes back to, sometimes you don't need all the technology to put out a great product. Their website's a little on the 2006, 2009 side, but man, you have to yeah, he has a list of what's available. Some of it might be gone, but you have to email him and he'll send you an invoice link to put your credit card in. He doesn't have a credit card processor, but he sends you a quality tree. David from Century Farm Orchards is something that is a guy that I admire. I've only got to shake his hand slightly in passing at their latest open house, but you can just tell him, hey, I'm in Wisconsin, I'm in Florida, I'm here, and here's what I think my soil is. And he'll give you immense amount of either apples or pears, and I think they have some figs that you can order from. Another one, it's out of Georgia. It's called Ison's Nursery, ISONS. They've got muscadines, grapes, berry plants. I just ordered 500 strawberry plugs from them. So they tailor to the landscaper or the large farmer, but they also tailor to the individual. And they've got fruit trees, nut trees, berry plants. Like I said, I think they're known mainly for their muscadines, but they have everything. I like the one-stop shop. I'm one of those guys. I want to fill my cart up, and then I start to look at the price, and I start deleting things that I don't need. Another place that I found very valuable is Facebook. There's a guy who I met through Facebook, and it was from a YouTube video, Southern Cultured Orchards. Larry Stevenson. He's another guy who has a lot of these trees that you're not going to find at your box store or even local online nursery. You can go on Facebook and Facebook Marketplace, and there's a lot of these plant nerds who they don't really want to get on YouTube and promote themselves. They just want to propagate trees and pay for their hobby, which is a lot of what this started out as for me. Is something that I heard from Jack and his friend David at the TSP workshop. It's like every hobby you have should pay for itself. It should never be a negative. And so if I need to go plant some trees for someone where I get to learn as well as make some cash on the side, well, why not do that? And so there's a lot of people on Facebook Marketplace that you can get trees from. And, it's one of those things where it goes to, is it as quality as you can get? Probably not, but the price is really usually right for you. But if you're looking for quality, Ison's Nursery is a great one. Stark Brothers is going to be on the very high end, but they have a guarantee that rivals like Walmart or Amazon, I should say. I'm showing my age, used to return stuff to Walmart. But like you can just literally, you send them a picture. I got a bunch of strawberries or now blueberry plants from Stark Brothers years ago, and they were all dead. And of course they said, "Oh, those are dormant." And I said, "I know dormant and I know dead. These are dead." And I sent them pictures and I said, "Look," and I was like, "You know what? I got a lady on the phone. I said, I'm going to put these in my hydroponic system and we're going to try to revive them. But if they don't come back, I expect to get a refund." And the lady saw I put them in there with a picture, and they sent me like 25 blueberries. They was like, "All right, this guy knows a little more than just your average Joe." I ended up getting, I think, 2 to come back to life out of the 25. But Century Farm Orchard is another great one. And I would definitely lean on David and their expertise.
Okay. And potted versus
Potted
bare
versus
root.
bare root. That goes to the nursery business in and of itself. There's every store is going to have a localized nursery. Tennessee, surprisingly, getting into this industry, not realizing that we're kind of like the nursery capital of the country. As far as
McMinnville is.
Bentonville, I mean, this centralized Tennessee area, because we have the ability to grow warm climate and cold climate products. And so, Pirtle Nursery, if you're in this middle Tennessee, even into the Georgia, Alabama region, and you bought a tree at Tractor Supply, it came from them. But the problem with that, and not just Pirtle, all the nursery, you're growing 10,000 trees, 20,000, 30,000, 100,000 trees. And so you've got your one little seedling that we talked about, and it's a twig, and then it goes into a 1-gallon pot or a tree tube, and when it's ready, they up pot it. Well, when you're doing 10,000 and you've got employees and times and costs, you're going to pull that out and you're going to throw it in a pot. You're going to throw dirt on it. So you have this, first of all, the root ball is now intertwined, and then it gets up potted into more soil, and it starts to grow out and circles the pot again. And then they put the dirt on top. And so you've got the root flare, and now it's got dirt up to here, probably almost to the graft union. And so we have the roots coming up out of the pot and entangling it, and then it gets put up into another pot, possibly because they didn't sell it that year. And so when you go to plant it, you score the roots, but you've got 2 or 3 root balls that you need to get down to. And so bare root is really the best, because what happens is they either grow it for a year or 2, and they don't up pot it. It's usually in hills, in farm fields. They pull it out, and then you just have essentially like my arm here. It's just like this. And then when it's dormant and you plant it again, the tree wakes up and doesn't know the difference, because it doesn't have a mass of, coconut core and pine bark that it's been growing in for 3 years that you're putting into a clay soil that we have in Tennessee, or sandy loam, or whatever you have in your area. And so what happens when you do that, it tries to grow out into that other soil type, and it doesn't like it. And so it'll turn in on itself. Plus it's already growing in a circle. And so you really set yourself up for failure by buying a potted tree. Now, that being said, I've got some content I'm putting out, but you can Google it, YouTube it, of how to untangle them. Put that tree into some water, let it soak, preferably deciduous, if not early spring, And when you do it earlier in spring, rip all the leaves off to put it back force it into dormancy. Because if not, it's just going to stunt its growth. But you're going to want to take all that dirt off and then get your pruners out and cut those roots away. So that way you get something that's not curling towards itself. So you can make your own bare root trees. I've done it a handful of times, especially I talk to people all the time. You go to Tractor Supply or these box stores, and you can get trees for pretty cheap right before Christmas time.
Sure.
And I look at them in the corner, and they haven't been watered, and I'm like, man, I got to save those trees. I'm going to save them. And you get them, and I'm just like, man, I shouldn't have bought these trees. They're so root bound, but you can literally take them, pull them apart, and get those roots growing again. And when you do that, when you plant any bare root tree or any tree, you really want to head that off. When you go to the box store and you see it in the spring, we all get spring fever. You're going to look for the tree that has the most growth. Sometimes it might even have a fruit growing on it. You don't want it.
Right.
You want to take that almost down to a single stem. And then the tree will then put out new growth. It has latent buds, or it might have buds that you can see, and it'll put out new growth. And I have a video, one of my first videos I put potted versus not. There's an account I'm working at, and you can see it's a plum from 5 years ago and an apple that we planted 6 months ago. It's got like 8 foot of growth, and the other one hasn't done anything. So bare root preferably, but don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough.
Yeah. No, I got an entire orchard's worth of trees for like right before the pandemic. I think it was $3 a tree.
Oh yeah.
It was all the varieties I wanted. So I picked up like 40 of them.
Yeah.
But it was the end of the summer, right? Either end of like summer clearance before they get their fall stock, because they don't want to keep taking care of them.
Right.
So I threw them in the shade, watered them for a few months. Once they went dormant, just pulled all the roots apart, and some of them haven't done well. Some of them have done great, but there's times when it actually makes sense to do that, to buy the cheap clearance one if you know how to deal with it.
Yeah, and even if you don't, I think a lot of people don't look at it goes back to those ditch natives. You're looking by the side of the road to plant your perennials, so that way we don't have to struggle all the time. And it's that same thing of look past those perennials into the woods, especially now. How many trees are rotten, falling over, already dead? There's a succession to trees and to a forest. And so just like your orchard, there's going to be trees that die. I went to Century Farm Orchards. It's 100-year-old farm. And they've got trees that aren't 100 years, but they're 20, 30 years old. And in between them, they've got some 2-year-old trees and some 5-year-old trees, because the trees died. Trees will get sick and they will die. And it might be from I had an account just the other day. They had pears, and the pears were dented in. And I was like, man, I don't know what that is. I know that there's a disease that you can get from the graft, which is stony pit disease, and it literally dents in the sides of the pears. But after we looked at it, and after I thought about it as I was leaving, and I came back to hand them their documents, we started looking at the other pears and other portions of the orchard, and they were covered. Some of them were covered with stink flies. So the marmoted stink fly also does that. And so it's one of those things where there's so much pest and so much disease. And if you're growing regeneratively, you're getting your soil right, it takes time. And we're probably going to lose some trees. That's where that Mark Shepard strategic total utter neglect. Hey, we're going to give the orchard as much benefit as we can. But if it doesn't grow, well, you know what? Maybe it's not meant to grow. Maybe that spot that lines up perfectly in the design is meant to put a bench there now. I had a guy, we were in North Carolina talking. He was like, I end up digging down and there's this giant rock there. I go, man, you should try to break that rock open a little bit and plant a fig on top, because the figs are meant to grow in the rocks. That's the crags of the Mediterranean maybe. And I've planted a bunch of figs just right on top of the ground. So there's always something that can be done, but sometimes it might be best to just let it die.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to observe how nature responds to the thing and then, act accordingly. So I've got a couple more questions. We had one from Rocky Pines, and I had one as well. So I'm going to throw his up. This is Vic. He's always on and asking questions. We love it. But I have a general question. Ryan and I spoke about it, but he's in northern Arizona he's got amongst juniper trees. I taught him that there's allelopathic properties to those. Any advice for mitigating the or eliminating them to be able to introduce his food forest?
So talk to me about, are we talking about the soil? Or I guess go into allelopathy and describe that in
Yeah.
juniper.
So kind of like elderberries or sunchokes, things like that. Junipers have their own allelopathic substance that they'll kind of leach out into the soil to keep other things from growing.
Sorry, I was reading it, and it's one of those things where sometimes you read the word and you don't remember what it says. I goes back to the soil, and you look at like places like Greg Judy, and they've got black walnuts everywhere. And black walnut, you can't grow anything near a black walnut. I grew a crab apple tree next to a black walnut tree, and then I grafted apples to that crab apple tree, and below that that was one of my first permaculture guilds I planted. So can it be a hindrance to the soil? Yes, it can. But by remineralizing the soil and getting it bioavailable to the plants, I don't know if there's many places where you couldn't just plant there and grow there. And I could be wrong. I haven't grown in northern Arizona against junipers before, but I have dealt with black walnut. And you look at Greg Judy's property, and he's got grass growing right up against there, and sheep are munching on it, and there's bushes and trees everywhere. So it's one of those things. Is the allelopathic tendencies of those trees an absolute, or is it just, hey, in that area where grandpa tried to plant something against that juniper, did it hinder him there? And now grandpa told grandson, and grandson told dad, and dad's now telling me that we can't grow anything there. I think try it, do a test plot, go see if you can find a spot that's got some old trees. I'm working a deal up the road with this farmer's market that ordered a bunch of trees, and I know they just stored them in the back behind the Christmas trees. I'm going to buy those up, hopefully, dollars on the dozen, just mainly for videos. But I think a lot of them have some good cuttings, and I'm, buy some stuff to just test, do a test plot, buy 10 trees, a few peaches, a few apples, a few pears, and plant them where you want that orchard to go, or that food forest, and see if it survives. I like David the Good. He does a tactic where he had I don't remember what the land was before, but where he takes and he fences off pigs, and that's his pig plot. And he grows his pigs there, and they feed them, pumpkins and all sorts of things. And then the next year they move the pig plot into a new area, and that's where he plants an island of a food forest. And so by changing the soil makeup before you planted that food forest, you've allowed whatever allelopathic tendencies that could be in the soil to vacate, because it's just been oversaturated with manure and organic matter. So I don't know if that's the question, or Ryan, you chime in and maybe speak to that, because I haven't dealt with the spots where an entire, edge line, other than maybe pines, but I think pines are also a combination of needles dropping when new growth comes and the acidity of the soil. But blueberries grow there. And so it's finding what could grow there and what, don't let perfect be the enemy of good enough.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I was thinking, I know Vic has chickens, so he could potentially consolidate some chickens there with something like a mulch to just try to get the soil microbes going again and rebalance to more traditional plants.
Yeah,
and then also think about,
go ahead.
I was going to say, think about edge species. So blackberries or other edge species plants that are going to be your first things to grow in, because your junipers don't care if there's blackberries under them, but they're going to care, their allelopathic nature is going to be more towards other larger trees in most cases.
And I would, do some research on it before giving a dead set answer to a customer. But, what amount of pioneering species are out there, tree wise or shrub wise, that you could succession plant this out? Hey, I have this desire to plant a food forest in this area. Well, this could be something where, what is it? Syntropic agroforestry would come into play, where we're
Mhm.
going in, and I guess it'd be, to I say that it's really the food forest method, where we come in and we plant overly heavily plant pioneering species by seed and by plant and by tree, and whatever comes up, we either help it grow and plant more of, and then come in year 2 or year 3 to plant our understory, our substrata that is actually going to be productive. So I think that could be also another tactic too. But I mean, if it was me and not knowing your land and your maintenance tactics, if you already have chicken bedding and wheelbarrows or tractors, you have to store that bedding before you use it for a year or so. Might as well store it where the food forest is going to be. Plant
Yep.
that there, keep adding to it, and then leave that there as organic matter. And I bet you that over time you will, get rid of that. And of course, you could also just chop down as many juniper trees as you can find on your property.
All right, I am 100% on board with that. I've got one more question that I had in the hopper, but we've had you here for a while, so I don't want to take up too much of your time.
You're
Um,
fine.
but the last question I had, and this could be pretty broad reaching, so feel free to truncate it as much as you feel like. But it's really, what are some of the most common mistakes when people start a backyard orchard?
So, yeah, that's a huge topic, but I think we've kind of talked about a lot of it in this whole what are we, hour and a half that we have here. So when you want to do a backyard orchard, is it right for you? Yes or no? We talked about, you've got a property and you've got a quarter acre of maybe grow space, or your house is on a quarter acre and your fencing is around that, and maybe you've got a 16th, along the edge of the fence. It might not benefit you to plant a tree. As much as I want you to plant trees on your land, it might not benefit you. You might be more beneficial to get some big pots and go with a bonanza peach or a columnar apple and some figs around your deck. So that way you can take them with you when you move, because on average, everyone's going to be in their home 3 to 5 years. Maybe that's changing with our society now and these 50-year mortgages. But most people are going to be sitting on their land and they're going to move. And so, as the person who's going to buy your house, do they see that as a value, or do they see it as a hindrance? Because most people who see and they're like, oh, that's a plum tree. Well, that's a Japanese plum that's sterile and it just has the exact, bark and flowering of a plum, but it doesn't actually produce a fruit. And to your point of your Wolf River apple, I know people in Chicago that I was so excited that they had fruit on their trees and they cut them all down because we get rats. I'm like, not if you pick the fruit. But at
Yeah.
that point in their trees, they were standard rootstock pear trees, and it was just too much fruit for their small backyard to handle. So I
Mhm.
think you have to think, is it right for you? And then go the next step of tree selection and rootstock selection. So this might be an opportune time for you to espalier out a dwarf apple along your wall of your house, or keeping that small. It's over there. Ann Ralph has a great book, Grow a Little Fruit Tree, where she had, I can't remember the dimensions, something like 60 by 100, and she had, I don't know, 75 apple trees in this spot where she essentially, if you took an umbrella, a full size umbrella, and planted it in the ground, that's how big she let the trees get. So that way she only got 12 to 24 fruits. So by selecting the right rootstock and selecting the right tree and then maintenance tactics, you could definitely grow in your backyard, but you have to think long term. Am I going to be on this land for the rest of my life? Or is this just a phase where I'm going to be moving in 3 to 5 years? So by thinking about that, you can then actually make a good conscious decision on what you're going to grow in your backyard orchard.
Yeah, that's great. I see so many people, they eat a Honeycrisp apple and they're like, this is the apple I want.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then they go to plant it and it's like, well, it also requires constant spraying and maintenance. And it doesn't, we all live in Tennessee. So zone 7 doesn't really grow in zone 7. Like,
Yeah.
I see people get stuck on the thing, kind of like getting
Yes.
stuck on swales or getting
Right.
stuck on whatever it is they've decided, or they grew up in Florida with, fill in the blank. And it's like,
Yep.
well, those don't grow here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's that it goes back to that education, goes back to what do you want out of your land? And yeah, I would love to see you do a lot of this stuff, but do you have someone like myself who can come in and do that, or Ryan who can come in and have you ever exfoliate a tree? It takes some work, and then it takes more maintenance than a lot of it, and then it's more work than I think people manage, but it's also very fruitful, pun intended. Look at Dave Wilson Nursery, kind of coined the backyard orchard culture, where I bought a bunch of trees last year, and a bunch of the grafts were like wonky, and I was like, well, if I put all three of these in one big central mineral tub, and they're all pointed out because they can't grow any other way, I've essentially got a 3 stalked apple tree growing out there in all different cultivars. So if you have a corner, of your property, you could grow 3 trees in the same hole instead of buying the $300 fruit salad, peach, nectarine, plum graft that's probably going to die. You
Right.
could buy 3 trees from Tractor Supply, dig a big enough hole, and put them in there. And that goes to the main part of the question is, what are people that they make the mistake, and that's digging a hole. If you look at the back of the card and it says dig the hole 3 times as big as the pot, which that means pot 3 size and then 3 deep. That's a massive hole. And what you're going to
Mhm.
happen, especially in our climate and our soil type, once you decompact that clay, which is dust that's bound together, it's going to sink. And now all that organic matter you're putting on it is going to fall into the hole, and it's going to rot the tree and girdle it, and it's just going to die. So
Yeah. I always joke about that because it's like the tree providers give you the exact right instructions to make the tree die after about 2 to 3 years. So you
that's
have to
right.
go and buy more, right?
Now, I was at Century Farm Orchards. I was at their property, and it's a century farm. It's been growing soil for over hundreds of years now, and they have a test plot where they show that, but they've got 12 inches plus of black gold, where we don't. And so,
Mhm.
what I always tell people, and you can use the cupping of your hands, or I think Captain America's shield. It's this bowl type shape. Take your pot, set it down in the hole, and that should be about as deep as you go, and then grade it backwards at an angle. So what we're doing is we're when you take and you dig that hole, you're only showing this portion of the topsoil, which is, if an inch would be great. You don't find them around here. Usually it's a quarter of an inch. And if you take that at a 45 or bring that back, you're exposing more linear inches of topsoil, as well as when the water does come in, it's going to overflow easier. So you're not going to get root rot, as well as when it compacts, you're going to put that pot in above grade. So now you've got air going to the upper portion of the roots, as well as when it does compact down, you might get it at grade or slightly above, and then you won't have the issues like the back of the tag will give you. So
Right.
yeah, I think tree planting size and at least what I found when I first started learning about it, like, oh, well, plant your tree 3 inches below the graft union. So that way it doesn't overtake the scion, which makes sense. But that tree has been growing for 2, 3, 5 years. It's already got a root flare. So when you're planting your tree and you're looking for that above grade, you're going to the top portion of the root flare. And so that's where you want to plant to, not 3 inches below the graft union. right to the root flare is where that line should be at minimum, preferably
Mhm.
higher, because you're going to get compaction.
Right. Awesome. Well, Jared, do you want to kind of lead us out, uh, all that?
Sure.
All
Well,
right.
Tim, thank you so much for joining us and educating me on and our guests on all things orchard and trees. This has been awesome. Um, I'm Jared Wilson. I own Resilient Living. You can find us at resilientliving.com. You can follow us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok, all the things. So basically, I'm a store. You might call me a prepper store. I've got freeze dried foods. I've got knives. I've got clothing. I've got books on all things. If you're anywhere in the Middle Tennessee area, I am right on 111, halfway between Sparta and Spencer. Stop in, say hi, hang out. Got coffee. It's free. um, and I'd love to be a resource to you and bringing experts like Tim, and that's really what we're all about, is building up communities that are resilient, and we do that with each other. And so having everybody brings something to the table, so come by the shop and just hang out.
Awesome. Tim, can you tell people where to find you? Let them know where your socials are and
For sure. For
what
sure.
you can
Yeah.
do for them.
My name's Tim. I'm at regenerativeorchards.com. All the socials at Regenerative Orchards. We plant orchards for you. We also maintain and do consultations. So if you just bought your property and you're looking out the door and you're like, man, I've got these old apple trees and they're not producing, I can come out and help you. If you've got a piece of property where you're like, hey, this half acre would be great for an orchard, come out. I might tell you it might not be, but we can definitely get you growing. If you let me. So give me a shout. Tim at regenerativeorchards.com is my email, and the website is regenerativeorchards.com.
Awesome. And we put all the social links that Tim gave us in the show description. At least I did on YouTube. So if you guys are wanting to get a hold of him, you can get a hold of him there. My name is Ryan Steva. I'm the homestead consultant, which is a little on the nose, but at least you'll remember it. And you can find me at that on all the socials as well. So, Tim, thanks again for being here. I learned a lot, and I really appreciated your candor, your time. I think a lot of people appreciate it on YouTube as well. We got people out here saying thank you. So, thank you, Tim, for taking your time and just dropping some knowledge on all of us.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.